Hi, my name is Noga Levy-Rapoport. I'm a 19-year-old climate striker, student, award-winning environmental activist, volunteer, organizer, and campaigner. Over the last 2.5 years, I've worked on and led campaigns across the UK in order to bring the climate crisis to the forefront of our national agenda, transforming conversations and fighting for systemic change, as well as pushing for youth empowerment at all ages. On February 15th, 2019, I turned up to Parliament Square in London to discover hundreds of young people as terrified and as angry about the climate crisis as I was, chanting and gathering on the grass outside Westminster, where inside politicians were making decisions that condemned our generation to a lifetime of volatile ecological chaos. But the immediate comradeship I felt with young people I'd never met before strengthened my focus, and I knew that just standing around on the grass wasn't enough. We had to be as loud as we could to ensure that those in charge of the callously cruel fossil fuel industry would notice us and realize that young people are serious about gaining autonomy over their own future. I borrowed a cheap megaphone from a fellow protester and began telling people to follow me down the road because I knew that once we began to reclaim our streets, we could start to be taken seriously. And by the end of that day, over 5,000 Londoners had swarmed Westminster, following me down past Downing Street onto bridges and roundabouts. And that was the real beginning of an upsurge of youth climate activism in the UK. Climate activism, and especially the new youth climate movement, is about mobilizing and galvanizing as many people as possible in the fight for justice. It's about a political education of how we got to where we are and how we can stand up and strike back. It's about changing those who are apathetic into those who take action, about creating a movement and then continuing to build on it. And that can only come about through that political education. Our responsibility will always be to educate and mobilize, because activists and campaigners have to be organizers, from the grassroots right to the international level, bringing people together against climate change. But the struggle has traditionally not been easy. Climate activists have been brutally neglected and ignored, the political class so often in its civility to the fossil fuel elite refusing to act, and instead cracking down with inhumane and violent policing of activists and campaigners. The efforts of UK anti-fracking campaigns were met with an onslaught of misinformation, denial, and silencing, not just on behalf of corporate climate criminals, but on behalf of government leaders too, whose funding of offshore fossil fuels has led to the neocolonialist industrialization of communities across the most vulnerable parts of the global south. Many indigenous activists and environmental defenders were not just ignored this decade, but have been actively erased from history, to the extent that many saw Greta Thunberg as one of the first activists, let alone young people, to speak up about climate change. Young people did manage to speak up. We took a stand and we broke down barriers because we were able to create and latch onto a message from the Youth Strike for Climate movement that everyone should know. Because it's what needs to be ingrained in young minds from the very beginning. That no one should ever feel they have to ask permission or defer to others in order to make a change and act on what they feel is right. And that's a belief that the futures and actions of children rely on, especially when faced with a dire ecological emergency. There has never been a time where it's more imperative that young people around the world realize their own strength and rise up to take action for their planet. And this starts at home. It starts with our communities and the support networks around us. And it starts with enfranchising people as young as me, not just to fight against climate change, but empowering our youth to collectively reshape our own communities, to ensure that change in our society happens securely, and to lead the way to ensure that real transformation happens from the bottom up. But that kind of leadership is like work. It has to be delegated and spread out across the collective, especially when, as children, as youth activists, activism was work. It was a full-time job, balanced and juggled precariously alongside schooling and socializing. And so the political belief in the need for horizontal organizing became integral to our success. The importance of regional networks and decentralization has never been more clear than when organizing for climate justice through strikes. Over 150 countries were registered at our peak for weekly or monthly strikes, and that was because we were able to break them down into the tiniest of regions. And whilst we are a generation that is actively seeking to break down stereotypes, the archetype of the digital generation is one we neither want to nor can shake free. We grew from just one teenager to a global network in the space of 2 years. And that wouldn't have been possible without digital power, without community grassroots organizing, without the autonomous work of Indigenous defenders on whose giant shoulders the climate strikers in the UK were privileged to stand on. Our most notable mobilisation to date, the historic climate strike of 20th of September 2019, saw 350,000 students and adults, parents and children walk out of workplaces, homes and schools together in the largest climate protest in British history, and across the world in our millions, the largest climate protest in global history. We wouldn't have been able to make that happen. I wouldn't have been able to make that happen if I had ignored the organising methods of those who had come before us, or ignored the offers of those who extended help, experience and collaboration. But instead, we utilised every single branch available to us of both online and offline organising. We directed new volunteers through our website. We utilised digital workspaces from regional to national to international working levels. We funneled channels of press and funding of social media, arts and graphics, community engagement, regional coordination, school development, political developments, everything. Because we learnt from all those who came before us, go through every alley and direction to organise in, leave no stone unturned in the fight for justice. And talk of that better world, that safer future, that just future is exciting and it is powerful. But there are so many young people out there who cannot access these kinds of spaces where they can learn about the ecological emergency and about its solutions. Young people who can't engage with community leadership, who can't reach out or connect or collaborate with role models and inspirations, because ultimately the enfranchisement of young people cannot come without urgent reform to our educational system and to the range of political solutions on offer. For far too long, students have been forced to focus on a limited range of subjects rather than developing our understanding of the world. Our right to view the educational framework as a place of opportunity, development, and understanding has been encroached upon. But if we want to channel real youth leadership, then from a very early age, we should be encouraged to work together, to learn from those older than us about the injustices of the world, rather than solely self-organise, but collectively move forward and embrace that organising power. If that doesn't happen, it is impossible for us to tackle the climate crisis as the greatest threat we have ever faced. We need an education system that can work for rather than against our future, ensuring that we can grasp the ecological emergency in full, understand its history, and in that way unlock its end. And this starts, of course, with community. It starts with our local initiatives. It starts with teachers and students receiving adequate funding and economic support to ensure that we can all start to engage each other in new ways of thinking and organising, as well as reorganising our communities. Just as climate strikers and activists taught each other what to do from a young age, it's now time to teach all of us, not just about the impacts of climate change that we're seeing all around us, but about its roots and how we can take action to save our planet. School groups working alongside strikers and activists can be formed and supported by staff and students in every institution, working to bring grassroots activism home to where change begins, with young people. A grueling focus on the rote memorization of our curriculum has to end. Instead, we should be focusing on ensuring that students can truly understand and address the climate crisis, and in doing so, gain the skills and tools needed for effective leadership. We saw with the youth climate strikes that the power of young people can change the world. It's up to all of us to keep that powerful momentum going. But the power of the fossil fuel industry is so great, and it means that we still have so much work to do. I've talked about the importance and how crucial political education is, and that means that we have to accept the stark truth. That if we wish to claw back from the brink of apocalypse, we need to face up to the fact that the UK has a historic responsibility in this crisis. Corporate imperialism and colonialism laid the groundwork for climate change, and the UK, like many other Western countries, has a historic record of abysmal, exploitative, extractivist capitalism, whilst our corporate leaders maintain their search for an ever-expanding economy and continual growth, instead of actually acting to save our planet. But activists have started to make a difference. Even so, we still face challenges. Over £1.7 billion worth of oil and gas projects have been given the go-ahead to take place in the North Sea. And that new licenses continue to be released for fossil fuel projects is shocking, but it confirms what we have been saying all along. The youthfulness that we have, our innocence, our naivety, allowing us to see the truth, that we can only rely on each other, on solidarity, on collective efforts to create the change and the better future we desperately need. because when greed is left unchecked, all we have is the belief and the will to fight back. And fight back we have to, because that fossil fuel industry is still so powerful. We continue to face division and denial, so we have to keep ramping up our efforts, taking strikes and demonstrations to an unprecedented scale of ungovernability. Even in the lead up to COP26, the all-important UN climate summit taking place in Glasgow at the end of this year, international climate commitments remain scarce and sparse. But in this time of uncertainty, the surety of the continuation of climate strikers, from our emails to our phone calls to our storeroom meetings to our corporate lobbies, the boldness of young people, the fury that drives our fight and our inability to give up, is something to cling on to as we still hurtle towards climate disaster. And I know that's a pretty bittersweet note to end on as I come to a close, but I'm not here to be optimistic. The most important message I have to relay isn't one of hope, it's of action. The more we act, the more hope we have, and then the more prepared we are to beat down the cruelty and the criminality of the fossil fuel industry. Young people have spent our entire lives fighting to be heard, screaming out as loudly as we can for even a smidge of a fighting chance, and we are finally winning. Because we have articulated our demands, we have focused our minds on a solution, and we continue to take to the streets this Friday again and again. That real youth leadership, both from adults and other young people, is about allowing ourselves to see what's in front of us, so that we can finally beat down the corporate climate criminals. We can recognize the tools we have and what we can achieve with them. We can stare the giants laying waste to our world in the face and intimidate them, and show everyone just what the Youth Strike for Climate movement has proved, that there is nothing weak about being just kids, especially when the strongest thing we need is climate action. And I've always believed that young people have a natural advantage when it comes to the attributes needed for collective leadership in social movements. We bring this energy and excitement that generations downtrodden by capitalism's horrors can't always rely on experiencing. And those surges of emotion and empathy, that hope, that ability to fall in love with the world around us and the people around us, the utilization of our digital networks, the social media we have, that endless archive through which we can continually share and inspire others. These are all gifts that young people have been blessed with. And we have to continue using those channels and using those tools at our disposal to maintain the youth leadership we need for the better future we want. From organising our first 5,000-strong London Youth Climate Strike in February of 2019, right to mobilising the largest climate protest in global history, youth strikers galvanised, educated, agitated and energised. We poured onto the streets every month without fail. We boldly took up spaces that had been stolen from us, and we screamed until our polluted lungs went hoarse. For youth climate strikers to change the world is one thing, but to ensure that young people can carry that burden on their backs and keep changing the world around us is a goal we should all dream of. The decade of the 2010s began with student protests and London riots, and we ended it with climate demonstrations on an epic scale. That is what we can achieve with the power of youth. So let's aim for new heights, embracing our collective organising power and what we can do with the spirit of community and solidarity. As the famous youth climate strike saying goes, as the oceans rise, so do we. Thank you very much.